Tucked away in the shadowed cliffs of Owl's Head Bay on the eastern coast lies a mansion with a secret. A place where the boundaries of science and the supernatural have been blurred, and where the government's interest in the paranormal first took root. It's here in the year 1959 that Dr. Andrija Puharich would attempt to bridge those worlds, establish science, and sincere paranormal research. It's a tale of eccentric psychics, experimentation, and the mysterious Roundtable Foundation, working together within these lavish mansion walls and darkened hallways. But before we dive into the eerie gatherings of military brass, psychics, and socialites, all working to unlock the human mind, we'll trace the strange events that sparked this occult arms race, starting with the discovery of a secret Nazi base called Ahnenerbe and the ensuing rivalry for paranormal dominance between the Allies. Join us on this episode of Belief Hole as we unlock the secrets buried beneath the spoils of war and follow the strange journey of a man seduced by the unknown and the unexplored powers of the human mind.
Conspiracy,
synchronicity,
Sasquatch,
homunculus,
alien races,
Satanism in Hollywood, MK Ultra,
Tartaria.
There's like a whole, I've been watching this one guy that...
Close the door, Ed.
Jeremy, close your door!
What's the,
Inner Earth Disagreements.
Ghost Dad.
I like that movie.
Dogman,
Bohemian Grove,
Corey Feldman,
Magicians Are Demons,
specters and
Spirit Summonings,
paralysis, strange disappearances,
Sky whale phenomenon.
Alternative History,
shadow people,
Quiet, I'm trying to say words with the mouth.
It's getting dicey out there. Poltergeists.
That's cool.
Anunnaki.
What is the moon?
Elf Towers. I would never talk about it. That's old. Y2K.
Cover-ups.
apocalyptic catastrophe,
Vampire.
Well, hello. I'm Chris,
I'm John.
And I'm Jeremy.
and welcome back to the Belief Hole. Yes! Today is an exciting experimental episode.
Oh?
We're not being experimental, but the episode involves interesting experiments. So I hope you're excited for that.
We're talking about clandestine operations, right?
Yes, today we're going back through the mists of time and we're going to explore the strange origin points of our government's interest in paranormal research. So I know that's something that will tickle your fancy.
Like hunting ghosts?
Hunting goats?
Ghosts.
No, not quite that sort of paranormal. More like
Oh.
extrasensory perception.
Oh, okay.
I know you've heard of MK Ultra, guys. Well, we're going to be talking about one of the origin points of that program.
Psi abilities,
Yeah, psychic abilities, ESP, clairvoyance.
telekinesis.
Yeah, even the one where you touch things, the dead zone thing. What's that called?
Oh, I was thinking about that yesterday. It was on the tip of my tongue. It'll come to me.
Psychometry. That's it. I can never remember that for some reason. We did a whole episode on it in the expansion. But before we get into the research, the actual experiments done by actually a very fascinating figure who we're going to get to, I should mention the book that I read. It's like 500 pages, so it took me a long time to absorb this, and we'll probably get into about an eighth of it, which is...
It's a little wordy too.
What, the book?
I mean, I guess just because of the Russian language. Or not Russia.
Oh, German?
German.
Yeah, I did give you a read with a street name, which is kind of hard to pronounce. But that's just the beginning of the book when we're going to be talking about that.
I think just because it's just a lot of new words that I've never heard before.
Yeah.
You know, like bases and just things that, there's a lot of information.
Right. Yeah. Locations. Very true. A lot of information. This book is packed with information. The book is called Phenomena by Annie Jacobsen. And it's actually a really compelling exploration into the government's covert research. Really, like at the end of World War II, leading through the Cold War with Russia. The cool thing is she was able to get in touch with a bunch of people who'd never been interviewed before. So on the record, she got like CIA handlers, Defense Department people, the actual psychics in these programs she was able to get on the record. And the book's really written well in this sort of narrative. It really draws you in. And the story is super compelling.
The characters are fascinating.
And the characters, that's one of the things I loved about this book. And again, as I said, Andrija Puharich. So yes, there's the name thing, John. So the reason why
Andrija Puharich is so interesting that we're going to get to is because here's a guy who is this brilliant scientist, really outside of the box thinker for his time, and he's kind of in between three worlds at the same time. He's in between this world of anti-establishment paranormal research, where he is on the fringe of study and really wants to explain extrasensory perception. At the same time, when the government hears of his work, he feels a patriotism and a loyalty to his government to a degree, and he's lured in by this naive notion that these newly created three-letter agencies like CIA are going to be on his side and really helping him and not stabbing him in the back, which you'll hear ends up happening. And the third world of the seduction of sometimes wanting to believe too much and loosening those scientific controls to then be ousted by your community of, quote unquote peers. So really interesting stuff. Again, he, as I said before we started, he reminds me of Professor X a little bit from the X-Men, which John has notified me he's not familiar with who that is, but basically the X-Men is a comic book, you know that, but Dr. Xavier was
He's the bald guy in the wheelchair.
the bald guy, the telepath, and he gets together a group of mutants who have special powers and brings them to a facility to train them. Of course, in the X-Men comics, it's the Xavier School for Gifted Youngsters. But interestingly enough, it is on the East Coast and it is in a mansion. So some parallels. And in a way, that's kind of what Andrija Puharich does. He grabs the most eccentric, most talented psychics that he can find at the time, gets a lot of benefactors, brings them together, and we'll get into what happens, but it's very similar. Anyway, but I don't want to get too far into it. First, let's go back to the end of World War II and what leads up to that conclusion of the war. And I really wanted to touch on the Third Reich's interest, I should say, in the occult and what would become the battle between the Allies later over paranormal dominance.
Over magic?
Over magic. Yes, who can control the most magic and have the most wizards.
I've heard rumors.
So it's May 10th, 1941, almost 2 years into World War II, when something totally unexpected happens involving Rudolf Hess, who, if you don't know, is the deputy Nazi party leader and Hitler's personal secretary, guy really close to Hitler. It's something very unusual and something that has a major effect on occult activity in Germany moving forward. Rudolf Hess, the deputy Führer of the Third Reich, woke up in his villa in the Munich suburb of Harleching, and, on the advice of his astrologer, chose this day to make his secret move. The 6 planets were in Taurus, and the moon would be full. Hess ate breakfast, had a brief conversation with his wife, and asked his driver to take him to the Messerschmitt aircraft facility in Augsburg. Shortly after 6 p.m., he climbed into a Bf-110 fighter bomber and flew north. Flying low so as to avoid radar, Hess made his way down the Rhine River, across the Dutch coast, out over the North Sea, and towards Scotland. Roughly 5.5 hours after taking off, he bailed out of his aircraft and parachuted into a field at Floor's Farm near Eaglesham, a village south of Glasgow. His intention, Hess later said, was to make his way to Dungavel Castle and barter an alliance with England, using as an intermediary the Duke of Hamilton. Instead, the deputy Führer of the Third Reich was arrested and taken into custody. This is where it gets interesting. Years later, while serving a life sentence in Spandau prison, Hess allegedly revealed his motivation to Albert Speer, the Reich's former Minister of Armaments and War Production. Quote, Hess assured me in all seriousness that the idea had been inspired in him in a dream by supernatural forces, Speer wrote inside the Third Reich. 2 of Hess's personal astrologers, Karl Kraft and Ernst Schulte-Strauss, were reported to have constructed the star charts that aided Hess in believing the 10th of May to be cosmically suited to his purpose. So, what that is saying is he decided, unbeknownst to Hitler allegedly, he had a dream that he could barter a peace on behalf of all of Nazi Germany with Britain if he got into a plane on this one fateful night with a full moon.
The stars aligned.
And then flies to Scotland and drops in with papers. Basically, an agreement of alliance that he wants Britain to sign to leave the Allies and join the Axis, join Germany. And he believed all this because of his astrologers and his star charts. And maybe a dream, as we'll hear.
How did Big H feel about that?
He was not happy. Big H was not happy about this. So, and you can tell because his response was pretty intense. He not only declared Hess insane, but within Germany, he created Special Action Hess, which was implemented. And this was basically making mediumship, anything occult, outlawed. He imprisoned 600 practitioners of supernatural occult divination, basically. Gathered up all like the scrying mirrors, crystal balls, a bunch of artifacts, entire libraries of mystical texts he confiscated. Basically just wanted to get everything out of Germany because he was concerned that people were being led astray basically by fake clairvoyants. And of course, who he's really worried about being led astray is the people closest to him, his advisors, officers.
Now, you could make the argument, as we talked about before, the idea that like scrying or divination, whether you believe in them or not, if the elites in power, in this case, Hitler, would say, no, you can't do this. Because, people say that he did believe, or at least the Nazi Party in general, had this occult connection. But then there's the argument, well, he didn't, but those around him did.
Yeah.
But then there's also the idea that like, magic tools for me and not for thee.
Right.
Yeah.
Like the people can't use them for power. Because you said he rounded them up, but did he destroy all of these things or did he just collect them?
Well, that's an interesting argument to make because you guys are right. I mean, whatever Hitler believed, everybody knows the name Heinrich Himmler. And Heinrich Himmler definitely believed that the supernatural was a big source of his power. And he believed that the heritage of the German people was tied to this ancient race and that a lot of his supernatural ability would come from collecting these artifacts related to this past time or whatever. So Himmler had already been collecting stuff even before this confiscation, been collecting magic objects and things like this, trying to find these sources of power. And you're right, magic tools for me and not for thee. Is that basically what you said?
Yeah, it's my bumper sticker.
Yeah, so that would be that argument. And one of the most interesting things that happened during the war in this period is the discovery of a place that Himmler had set up himself, a secret paranormal occult research facility known as Ahnenerbe. And this is really interesting. It gets very much into a sort of Indiana Jones type atmosphere. And I guess this is probably where that came from. This is inside Ahnenerbe.
For 10 weeks now, the Russians had ruled Berlin. Members of an elite U.S. scientific intelligence effort called Operation Alsos had been trying to gain access to a bombed-out villa in Dahlem, a formerly affluent suburb where numerous Nazi science institutes once stood. The villa in question was located at 16 Peucklerstrasse, and quote, "The Gestapo scientists had all cleared out before our arrival," recalled Samuel Gaudsmit, a nuclear physicist and the leader of the group. Quote, "Some of them leaving sufficient clues in their deserted homes for us to track them down later. This villa was not a home, but the former headquarters of Himmler's Ahnenerbe Institute. The Alsos group was only vaguely familiar with the Ahnenerbe's research. Only weeks before had it come to light that through a division called Applied War Research, how Heinrich Himmler used the supernatural and the occult as part of the Nazi war effort was not yet understood by Alsos. Quote, "Because the activities of this strange academy were shrouded in a mystery that just might have concealed something really important, we needed to make a thorough investigation of the organization," Gaudsmit later explained in discussing the Ahnenerbe. Gaudsmit made his own way down into the basement of the villa, where he came across the small cache of Ahnenerbe relics. Remnants of weird Teutonic symbols and rites, he recalled. Strange dummies which at first looked like bodies of victims, a corner with a pit of ashes in which I found the skull of an infant. Had Heinrich Himmler been a practitioner of black magic, Gaudsmit wondered, what had been going on here? The mission of Ahnenerbe, according to Allied intelligence, was, quote, "to prove that the Nazi ideology was directly descended from Teutonic culture and was therefore superior to all others." To demonstrate this link, Himmler leaned on the mystical and the occult. Ahnenerbe scientists were dispatched across the continents to excavate prehistoric sites attached to mystical and supernatural ideas. From Istanbul to Iraq, they searched the globe for lost lands like Atlantis and fabled items like the Holy Grail and the Lance of Destiny. the spear said to have pierced Christ in the ribs as he hung on the cross. On Himmler's orders, SS officers scoured Germany's occupied territories, raiding libraries of the occult and looting artifacts related to magic. Entire museum collections of mystical texts in Poland, Ukraine, and Crimea were crated up for Ahnenerbe possession. Among the items said to be the most coveted by Himmler were artifacts of ancient Germanic magic that had miraculously survived 3 centuries of witch hunts. The Ahnenerbe was vast and well-funded. It had 50 subsidiary branches covering broad natural science fields such as archaeology, geology, and astronomy. But it also operated highly specialized divisions, like one for geochronology, the dating of rock formations and geological events. One branch, called Survey of the so-called Occult Sciences, was where research on extrasensory perception, astrology, map dowsing, spirit channeling, and other forms of anomalous mental phenomena and divination was pursued. And it was from the official Ahnenerbe documentation on these unusual subjects, captured separately by the United States and the Red Army, that the psychic arms race between the Soviet Union and the United States first got underway.
So where is all this stuff now?
Locked away in some secret area, I'm sure. CIA, Army intelligence. I know right after this, basically ASOS, that group that John mentioned, initially they were interested in this stuff, but they didn't quite know how magic and the occult interplayed with what they were researching over in this space. So they kind of just shelved it because they didn't have time. They were focused on grabbing all these crazy mechanical technologies and all these chemical warfare technologies that really advanced at that point the Nazi military had been developing. So they were going after rockets and chemicals.
Right.
So they just created this stuff up and put it away and said, we're going to look at this later because there's something here, but we're not sure what it is, basically. So to answer your question, as far as like where are the certain artifacts, where they are now, I'm sure that there's anything of really great interest, it's probably still at military intelligence, CIA, Defense Department or something, some black budget box somewhere.
Now, the securing of the Ahnenerbe base, if you could call it a base or whatever, station, research center,
Villa.
Didn't that kind of start the occult research Cold War between us and the Soviets? Because weren't they there?
Yes.
The Russians were there too, right?
Well, that's the thing. So we were allies, right? Soviet Union, America, working together. But once the Nazis had been defeated, both sides realized like, oh, well, it would be to our advantage to get all this stuff before they get the stuff, the other ally.
Right.
So this would start to begin the Cold War.
So we break up.
That would keep us at arm's length from Russia, realizing that we're the two great powers. We've defeated this dragon, Germany. And so very quickly you get Russia and the US concealing what they know and grabbing what they can from the Third Reich. And this begins not only the Cold War, but the paranormal Cold War, the extrasensory Cold War, any sort of strange phenomenon stuff they grabbed, they tried to keep from each other. And this begins really what this book is all about. These clandestine projects that would pop up decades later, investigating ESP, the influence of the human mind, paranormal ability.
They were born out of this discovery of this Germans' research.
Yes. It all comes from here, this point.
Yeah.
From this mysterious base, which is such a fascinating, obviously tragic. They did a lot of evil stuff, I'm sure, in this base. This base, as you'll hear, had a lot of arms, had a lot of different branches to it, as you'll hear, and some pretty horribly procuring victims for experiments. But we're not going into detail on that aspect of it. This is really just the launching pad. But it's a fascinating sort of origin point, I think, to our research into strange phenomena.
Fascinating.
Interesting.
Yeah.
What happens next?
Okay, well, moving right along. So the first place we see the research from Ahnenerbe pop up, really, is, of course, CIA. And why? Why did the CIA start looking into this research? Well, why does the CIA normally, CIA is listening out there, earmuffs. But why do they normally look into things? Because they want to use it.
It's fun to use earmuffs for adult men.
And women. It's an
it's only
equal
men.
Opportunity employer, the CIA.
Well, earmuffs because I don't want them to come after me, is basically what I'm saying.
Well, I know. It's just funny to speak of like a high-level intelligence agency for like a child that you'd normally say for children.
But so CIA usually what would you think they would be doing with this research? They're going to use it for probably maybe corrupt means, or maybe you could argue like self-defense, but basically they want to use it to influence human behavior. That's the purpose.
By any means necessary.
Exactly.
You're talking about specifically like telepathy.
Yeah, like so that arm of Ahnenerbe that was researching specifically extrasensory perception. They take this research and they want to use it to basically learn how to brainwash people, control people, get them to do what they want. Also, later on, you'll hear how they want to use it to try to find, for example, magic mushrooms that they've heard of, rumors through the world.
Oh, yeah.
They want to find these sort of divine mushrooms to harness the power of ESP and be able to turn it on and off so that they can tap into the clairvoyance of the divine and find out information from enemies, things like that, which is sort of a pessimistic way to use clairvoyance, kind of a sad way to do it.
Now, I don't want to knock you off your track here, Chris, but
I know where you're going.
are you going to mention God's flesh?
God's flesh. John, have you heard of God's flesh?
No, it sounds fun.
It's a legendary hallucinogenic mushroom.
It's a mushroom, which is such a great name. It's such a great name for a mushroom.
I think I would freak out if I remembered what the name was of what I took.
Yeah. In the middle of eating it.
Did you see that piece of pizza? It's got God's flesh on it.
Not that kind of mushroom.
Yeah, God's flesh.
It's got a weighty name to it.
It's called that though because it's the South American tradition where this comes from, that native area. It's thought that taking this mushroom, you can contact the divine and be in the presence of the divine and learn things through
It
clairvoyance.
should be called like God's mind then, not flesh.
Yeah.
God's flesh implies like a cannibalistic route to attaining knowledge. You know, you might think, if I eat my neighbor's brain, I'll get his knowledge, which most of us kind of have that idea. But
Well, you think about it, even in the Christian tradition, you eat God's flesh to cleanse, right? Forgiveness.
oh yeah, if you believe in the sacrament.
Right. So either way, depending on different places, you're eating somebody.
I just personally don't agree with the name.
I disagree with its naming.
You should write their publicists.
Change the name.
I think it's a great name, but I see totally see your point, John.
Well, they do change it. They give it a scientific name, as we often do.
How about God's hug? Can we name it God's hug?
God's hug. That's better. Yeah, I'm not going down the line there to answer your question, Jared, right now. We will get into that towards the end of the episode and
Okay.
in the expansion probably.
Cool.
With Puharich and the hunt for mushrooms.
Because the CIA wanted to find that, right? I've just never heard of it before. I thought it was fascinating.
That was definitely a direction they were going into specifically. You're right. Look for ways to influence human behavior. It did come from psychedelics.
Yeah.
That was kind of what they were really going for after this, moving into the 50s.
MK Ultra.
An interesting quote here from the book. And by the way, the excerpts that we're reading are from this book, Phenomenon, fantastic book by Annie Jacobsen. And this is a quote from the book in relation to the beginning of these projects.
One of the CIA's early programs sought to develop a truth serum, an age-old quest that touched upon ideas of magic potions and sorcerer's spells, in concert with U.S. Army scientists at the Army Chemical Center in Edgewood, Maryland. This classified program was first called Bluebird, then Artichoke, and finally, MK Ultra. For these and other programs like them, the CIA hired magicians, hypnotists, and even Sybil Leek. Who's that?
Yeah.
Britain's famous White Witch.
Yes. But yeah, again, fascinating. Taking these people that are kind of on the fringes of society. Well, I mean, you could argue Sybil Leek was a very famous, prominent witch in England, but hiring all these different people who are doing very unique sort of fringy sort of careers, like magicians and hypnotists and things like that, and bringing them in, working on these things, trying to merge science and mysticism, which is really what our next character in the story, our first like main focus here, and one of my favorite characters in the book, Andrija Puharich. This is really what he is known for, is trying to bridge science and mysticism. And this all happens because he has a life-changing experience with the dog, John, you'll appreciate. It's with the dog at a very young age that really sets his life on this trajectory to become a trailblazer in ESP research later on. And as I said, he reminds me of kind of Professor X a little bit. We'll get into that later. He'll be creating a foundation where he brings people together in a mysterious mansion on the eastern coast.
Was that Owl's Head Bay?
Yeah. And it's where he begins to explore really in earnest and in extreme ways sometimes an experiment
Away from prying eyes and through experimentation, searching for
the possibility of extrasensory perception, as well as pyrokinesis and even communication with extraterrestrials. And that's what gets him into a little bit of hot water with other scientists.
He's starting fires with his mind.
He's starting fires. What?
With his mind.
Oh, did I say pyrokinesis?
You did. You said Drew Barrymore's power.
Oh, maybe they worked on that too.
Telekinesis.
They did a lot of stuff. There's a lot of interesting people there, but we'll get into that. But let's go back and hear how this all began with Andrija. In 1918, Andrija Puharich was the son of poor Yugoslavian immigrants. His brutal, violent father had come to America as a stowaway. His mother, a housewife, nurtured and protected her only son as best as she could. Growing up in the Chicago slums, Andrija worked as a milk delivery boy for Borden's dairy farms. And it was in this context that he had his first experience with what he would call extrasensory perception. The ability to perceive things by means other than the five senses. One day, on a milk run, a vicious dog cornered him. Fearing that the animal was about to tear him to shreds, Puharich panicked, but there was nowhere to run. Quote,
So I sent out feelings of calmness and peace.
Puharich later recalled. Remarkably, the dog calmed down, then sat, leading him to believe that mind-to-mind telepathy had, quote,
Stop the attack.
entranced and empowered by this experience, Puharich vowed to become a medical doctor and solve the biological circumstances behind the mysterious force of nature called ESP.
I think we've all had that experience to some degree,
Yeah.
you know?
You feel like you've communicated with something somehow.
Yeah, you kind of mind, I mean, whether that's the feeling of staring at someone, you know, and they
Yeah.
look at you sort of thing.
Yeah.
We had an episode, the dog episode. We talked about that kind of stuff.
What's it called? Morphic fields.
Morphic fields.
Yeah.
Yeah. Where people can sense your
Mm-hmm.
stare.
An invisible energy field that surrounds all of us that allows us to communicate with each other.
Exactly.
Yes. Or summon moths to our hand.
Yes, it's interesting you bring that up, John, because, well, first of all, I think it's interesting to me because not his experience per se, because I feel like, as you said, this is sort of an experience that a lot of people have, I feel like at some point in their lives, but the fact that he took this and made it an obsession to where it took him to medical school and started doing these projects and eventually got him like crazy funding throughout his entire life. He stayed on this one experience. I think that's interesting.
But he never developed that thing that he had a sense for in that moment, right? Like he never gained abilities. Do you think there's part of him that was like in pursuit of that because he wanted to tap into that for himself? Or was it more just a fascination with the general ability?
That's an interesting thought.
Maybe a mix of both.
Yeah, it could be. He definitely surrounded himself with these people. So maybe he was a little bit of that.
He wanted to be down with OPP, other people's perceptions.
Ooh, good one.
Other people's perceptions.
Yes, and to your point, John, when you mentioned going back to the morphic fields, the idea of this energy surrounding all of us, communication through that, it's interesting because Puharich at this time, the pre-morphic field conversation, he wanted to explain and thought this could be explained by an internal biological mechanism somehow, that there was an energy flow between atoms.
Like a psychic gland.
You know, you have to, in the context of the time period of what was being researched, when he gets into college and eventually after college and working at this institute we'll get into, you know, it's the 40s and 50s, it's the atomic age. This is before like any sort of metaphysical science or quantum physics or anything like that is even being talked about. It's basically atoms. Everything is internal biological. So he wants to explain ESP through these terms. So he develops this theory called the Puharich theory, which eventually he gets some people invested in. But it is still obviously sort of paranormal, supernatural in a way, but he wants to try to find a scientific explanation through the terms he's aware of at this time. So, speaking of investigating paranormal phenomena, as well as legends and lore, you guys definitely need to check out Astonishing Legends podcast.
Yes.
It's been one of my favorites for years now.
That's right. For me too.
And if you haven't heard them yet, and you like our show, you're going to love their show. They talk about all sort of mysterious places, unusual phenomena, historical events, and they do so much research on that show. It's great to listen to those guys, Scott Philbrook and Forrest Burgess, having these conversations in a style that really engages curiosity.
Yeah, Chris, and what I love about the show particularly is, you know that feeling you get when you're sitting down with your friends just talking about weird stuff?
Oh yeah.
The true high strangeness, the bizarre of the bizarre. It's like that. And that's why I love the show. It just feels authentic while also being heavily researched and a lot of fun.
Yeah, and they also do a really good job about keeping it light and fun with some good humor in there from time to time, but they're very sincere about the subject matter, which obviously we really appreciate here at Belief Hole.
And as I said, the episode topics are wide-ranging. It is an inexhaustible chasm of the strange, with the assistance of their research team, the Astonishing Research Corps, that helps them separate fact from fiction and really dive into these stories in a very profound way, sometimes leading to multiple-part episodes.
Yeah, probably some of the deepest dives I've ever heard are on Astonishing Legends.
So if you like historical mysteries, if you like legends and lore, if you like the strange, unusual corners of our world, you're going to want to check these guys out.
That's right. And Astonishing Legends is available wherever you like to listen to podcasts. So search them out, give them a listen, and subscribe. We'll have a link for you guys in the show notes, so you can click there and get to them right away. Again, that's Astonishing Legends. Or visit astonishinglegends.com for more information.
Do it, you won't regret it. Tell them Believable sent you. So briefly, I'm just going to touch on Puharich's more formative years before I take us up to the opening of the Roundtable Foundation. Because there's some things that happen that continue to kind of persuade him into this sort of line of thinking, this idea, this theory that he would later advance and explore, that animals, insects, people are all in a wash of this sort of extrasensory communication, and that some people with latent telepathic abilities, for example, could be opened up, I guess you'd say, with the right sort of electromagnetic field in the environment. So after that fateful encounter with that dog while he's delivering milk, and when Puharich becomes a teenager, his parents sadly split up, and he goes with his mom to live on a farm in Illinois, where she says in her book, quote, "The natural world cast a spell on him." And through his time on this farm, he's observing the animals, the insects. He has time to ponder their movements, the seemingly telepathic communication that they have. And as he moves on in life and his education, he wonders about what even makes man think certain thoughts. But he wonders about this from a biological point of view. And how does this perception work? Does consciousness come from within or without? And here's a great quote that comes from the book that sort of combines these two worlds of his formative years on the farm, observing nature, being captivated by it, and his later research into biological mechanisms within the human mind, or in the human brain, rather. And in this quote, he's urging his colleagues at university. He's urging them to do the sort of thing that he did on the farm, to kind of think outside the box, and to observe the natural world with an open mind. Quote,
"Watch long trails of birds in migration, the unerring return of the homing pigeon, the struggle of the fish going upstream to spawn, the orderly movement of armies of ants, the pecuniary nature of the bee. For in nature, the mysteries of the universe are revealed. I have wondered at the clairvoyance of the mind that can break loose from the shackles of conformity and facts, and can give us the philosophy of Plato, the universe of Newton, the spirit of Christ, and the psychological insight of Henry Thoreau, Walt Whitman, William James, and Khalil Gibran. The deep study of this problem is my life's work."
Yeah, so basically he wants to answer this question. And he thinks at this point it's in the nature of our nervous system, that there's a sensitivity of forces, he's saying, some of which we already know, but many that we don't yet. And he wants to figure that out. He wants to find the source. He wants to see how it works. But this is where we get to, I think, the coolest part of our episode today. It might be a good spot to take a break, but we're going to get into after this his development of this sort of secret society of elites, actually. This place called the Roundtable Foundation that he creates with an eccentric cast of psychics, socialites, scientists, people from the Navy, and gets all this funding through the foundation to open up operations in this mysterious mansion on the cliffs of Owl's Head Bay to run these sort of fringe experiments. And he does get some interest from someone at the Navy that begins a sort of separate course, as we'll hear.
The CIA, right?
Well, at first it's military intelligence. They want to develop some certain weaponry using ESP, and then the CIA eventually tap him on the shoulder. But we'll get into that. But
This is all information that's out, right?
Yes, none of this is conspiracy theory. I mean, all of it is at least on the record from the people involved, including members of the CIA and, of course, the psychics that were there themselves.
For those that forget, there's a difference between conspiracy theory and conspiracy.
This is true.
There are many conspiracies within stuff we're talking about today, but yeah, it is not theory because it's on record.
Yeah, obviously you have to conspire to do things.
Yeah, that's funny. Yeah, most things in the world are conspiracies.
Right.
Because people conspire all the time and leave others out of that conspiracy.
Conspiracy.
Exactly. And you'll hear in this episode how, unfortunately, Puharich, because of his naive trust of some of these outfits, falls victim to some of these conspirators.
I like Puharich.
Right?
He seems like a good guy.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, he has some questionable things.
you learn some stuff later.
Oh,
Yeah.
really?
I mean, he's a man. He's a man with faults.
Real sad story about his wife. what happens with her.
Yeah, we'll touch on Jenny. She seems like a sweet lady. Had some mental problems, some depression related to Puharich's work and the lifestyle in the mansion. But we'll get to that and some other things that aren't as sad, but are very interesting.
So stay tuned for that. Hey, what are we doing in the expansion? This is a continuation, right?
Yes, the expansion is going to be exciting. I wish I could fit all of this book into even a main and expansion. That's never going to happen. Maybe we'll do more stories from it down the line. But in the expansion, we're going to follow what happens with Puharich. I don't want to spoil the end of this episode by telling you what's coming up in the expansion, but
Yeah, we still got to get to our second half, right?
second half's coming. But into the expansion, we're going to follow more of his story. We're going to see what happens with the downfall of the Roundtable Foundation. And we're going to see his sort of growth, though, into projects into CIA, including a name you might be familiar with that Puharich is known for bringing to the U.S.'s attention. Uri Geller.
Controversial figure.
Very controversial figure. A lot of people think he's a complete fraud. A lot of people think that he is very talented psychic. So we'll get into that. That story is incredible. And we're going to touch on some fascinating experiments done by the CIA that have been declassified with Uri Geller, with some pretty outstanding and mind-blowing results that I think are going to surprise you. And if you take notes, maybe you can share them with your skeptical friends. And hopefully maybe touch on Ingo Swann. We probably won't have time this expansion episode, but I will be coming back to this because I want to get his story. Such a great book. But stick around after the break. We're going to go into that clandestine mansion and see what experiments they're running in the darkness of the Eastern Coast.
Sweet.
Nice.
Stay tuned.
And now, a short clip of the members-only expansion episode.
Access granted.
At the CIA, Dr. James Moore was still posing as a professor, still trying to ingratiate himself with R. Gordon Wasson, still without success. Puharich, however, remained in close contact with Wasson as the banker turned ethnomycologist prepared for his third expedition to Mexico in search of the sacred mushroom called God's flesh. On June 29, 1955, Wasson arrived in the remote village Oaxaca. A local guide took them to a deep ravine awash in Teonanacatl mushrooms after a spring season of heavy rain. Wasson reported hallucinating intensely, but stated that no divinatory powers were revealed. After the mystical experience was over, the two New Yorkers packed up a cardboard box full of fungi and returned to the United States. Upon arrival, Wasson sent a cache of mushrooms to Puharich at his laboratory in Maine. Inside the Roundtable laboratory, Puharich performed a chemical analysis of the mushroom's toxicity. 3 chemicals produced the hallucinogenic effects, he learned: muscarine, atropine, and bufotenin. Armed with this information, he set out to create an antidote. Puharich's plan was to drug Harry Stump to learn whether the legend was true, whether God's flesh could produce divinatory powers in certain men. But first, Puharich decided to try the hallucinogenic mushroom himself. Apparently, so did Alice Bouveret and a few other individuals from the lab. There is no record of how these personal drug experiments turned out.
Welcome back. Welcome to the mansion. John, are you as excited as I am for this next part?
I'm definitely more excited.
Good. Now that you know what the episode is about?
Yeah.
Okay, well, it's going to get crazy, man.
I want to hear more about Puharich.
Oh, you're going to hear more about Puharich and his team of X-Men, as I like to think of them.
Every time you say X-Men, John loses more and more interest.
You got to bring in He-Man every once in a while. It makes more sense to
His
me.
team of He-Man and He-Women.
He-People.
He-People.
His team of He-People.
Yeah, I guess I should have found a more appropriate illusion.
I just never was into the comic book stuff.
Yeah.
Like, I don't watch any of those movies or the Marvel stuff.
Well, this is predates all that.
Yeah, but it's still in the same vein.
More just bring it up because it's such a specific metaphor. I guess you could have said like
Well, it's so perfect.
a team, I guess, but they didn't have special abilities.
I do know what you're talking about. The more I think about it, they bring together all these beings that have like special abilities.
Yeah. And they all into one house in this
Yeah.
mysterious place. So that's why it triggered that thought into my mind.
It makes sense. It makes sense.
Anyway, we'll move on from that analogy. Goodbye, Patrick Stewart. Hello, Puharich.
It's a great transition.
Uh,
You're making me uncomfortable.
Now, okay, but let's get back into it. Okay, so now Puharich talks to a friend, right? So he's come up with this theory. He's in class and he's talked to this friend. He's like, you need to take this show on the road, man. You need to go and talk to other scientifically minded people and tell them about your a little out there idea, but I think it could have some traction. So get out there and talk. So he starts giving lectures, travels around, and in doing so, he strikes a chord with a lot of people, a lot of wealthy people. There's a lot of people, it turns out, that are interested in this conversation. It's something that's been kind of burgeoning in certain socialite circles, and he's sort of hit that chord.
So when you say his out there idea, are you talking about a specific idea?
Yeah, so Puharich's theory is the idea that, I had it written down somewhere, but basically, okay, here it is. And this is right from Annie Jacobsen's book, Phenomenon. This is, quote, he formulated his first theory on nerve conduction and an unknown energy force, which he called the Puharich theory. Quote, the brain and the nervous system are linked to cells, and instructions in the form of energy flows between them, Puharich wrote. The point that I am trying to establish is that the brain is an area wherein is localized the cell energy of the body. I shall label the cell energy dynamics. Puharich believed this energy force, present in all animals and insects, radiated somewhere on the electromagnetic spectrum, but that man had not yet invented technology to measure or record it. Not yet, anyway.
Okay, so that's what he's getting encouraged to go around and talk about and give lectures.
Yeah, sorry, I should have made it more clear, but yes. During these lectures, he picks up one person. There's a whole group of people he ends up picking up that are investors that are very interesting. One person I want to touch on in particular is pretty interesting girl. Her name is Alice Astor Bouverie. And as her name sounds, she is an heiress of a large fortune.
Bouverie.
You can't be anything but an heiress with the name of Bouverie.
Alice Bouverie.
I know.
Presenting Miss Bouverie, Princess of Carnival Cruises. Carnival Cruises.
Terrible legacy to inherit. I feel like if you're going to have anyway, dumb joke. But let's hear what she really inherited. So this is interesting. This is why I think she's an interesting investor, is because she is seduced by this idea of ESP. She's always been fascinated. She knows about ESP and telepathy because her dad, John Jacob,
Jingleheimer
not
Smith.
Jingleheimer Smith. No, you're going to go there. John Jacob Astor IV. He was the dynamo. He was a real estate tycoon. Oh, he's also one of the richest people in the world when he died. He was also a science fiction writer. And in one of his books, he wrote about telepathy. And I guess he talked about the idea of telepathy with his young daughter at the time. Sadly, when he died, she was only 10 or 11 years old. And he died on a little-known boat, the Titanic.
Yeah, that's right. And as the story goes, he actually tried to get on a life raft when it was going down with his wife.
Right.
But when they told him he couldn't get on, women and children first, I believe he kissed her goodbye and quietly stepped back into the crowd of men who would go down with the ship.
Anyway, because of this interest in ESP she inherited from her father, she decides to give a lot of her inheritance to Puharich and to the Roundtable Foundation to invest in these sort of fringe scientific theories, to really put them to experimental rigor. She was left $5 million, which when the book was written in 2017, that equated to about $120 million that she got from her father. And she gave a big chunk to Puharich, his biggest investor for a long time. So she was the first investor, but word got around quickly through social circles. Turns out a good amount of people wanted to invest in this. So he was able to garner this group of old money philosophers, scientists, diplomats, weapon designers, yes, poets and mystics that all came to this Roundtable Foundation to witness and participate in a lot of these experiments. And so now, backed by some substantial funding, Dr. Andrija Puharich moves his family from California to a seaside mansion in Glen Cove, Maine. And this move in 1949 would be the beginning of his really serious research efforts into the paranormal and psi ability in the human mind. But just 600 miles away, while this is going on, Over in D.C., the Central Intelligence Agency Act is passed. And to quote Ann Jacobsen's book, this expanded the agency's authority. Soon the civilian pursuits of the Roundtable Foundation and the national security goals of the CIA would intertwine. But back to the mansion. We have a nice description here from the book to bring us into the atmosphere.
The opulence of Puharich's new home and laboratory facility, called Warrenton Estate, was part of its mystique. The main house was designed by the famous architect Stanford White. Warrenton had 45 rooms, 8 fireplaces, and 12 baths. There were wraparound porches, a soaring 3-story entrance, a library, a salon, and a billiard room. From the 3rd floor, Turret's guests enjoyed sweeping views of Owl's Head Bay, of seagulls and swans and sailboats on the sea. The 65-acre property featured manicured lawns, boxwood hedges, vegetable and flower gardens. There was a footpath leading from the main house down to a private beach on Penobscot Bay. The adjacent 2-story steepled barn would become home to Puharich's impressive laboratory, where a staff of research assistants worked on experiments relating to the 5 known senses and a quest for the elusive 6th sense. The plan of action at the Roundtable Foundation was to establish itself as a trailblazer in ESP and related research, then garner blue sky research grants from national science foundations, corporations, and the government.
Doesn't that sound like a nice place to go, though?
Yeah,
I'd like to be there.
I would like to go.
I'd like to research there.
Yeah.
What about Belief Head Bay?
That'd be perfect. Believe Hole research facility. It just sounds mysterious and,
I'm sure that's what's going to come up in the animation.
Oh, yes. Check it out on YouTube. But yeah, an awesome place. Obviously, a pretty incredible place to just get off of the back of all of your funders.
Was there a name for this place?
It's the Warrenton Estate is what it was known as, a.k.a. Puharich's Mansion of Mystery.
Is it still there?
Yeah, I think so.
Really?
Well, I looked up pictures of it, but I don't. Though they were old pictures, so
I don't see any views of a bay. Looks pretty landlocked, at least from the pictures I see.
well, maybe the edge of the property looks over into the water. Don't ruin the illusion, Jeremy.
There is a pool. There's a pool there.
There's a pool.
It looks over the pool.
We'll have links in the show notes and in the video, but
Yeah.
just keep imagining the cliffs because that's what I'm imagining. And I'm seeing
Very cool.
lightning flashing and like all these scientists smoking pipes.
I
and,
feel like it looks like, what's that movie
It looks like Batman's house.
with Leonardo DiCaprio?
Great Gatsby.
No, they're like trapped on an island. It's like an insane asylum.
It's like the murder mystery
Oh.
one.
Great film.
Yeah.
I thought it was okay.
I thought you said you don't remember if you saw it.
No, I saw it. It was just,
I thought it was really
I just
well
couldn't
done.
remember what happened in it.
I think I've seen it like 3 or 4 times.
Really? I should give another shot. Maybe I was in a weird mood. I don't
I
really
love
remember.
the feeling of that. I think it's a hurricane or something.
Shutter Island?
Shutter Island, that's it.
Shutter Island.
Yeah.
Wasn't it one of those like, can you trust the narrator kind of films where like
Psychological.
number 23, like, is he insane or is this
Yeah.
really happening? Okay.
That might have been why I wasn't too super into it.
I'll have to watch it again.
I
though.
thought it was really good. It was very surprising for me in many ways.
I mean, compared to most of the movies out now, I imagine it's got to be pretty decent.
You know what else is good? Dante's Peak.
Here we go. Movie tangent time.
And one more, Passengers. Have you seen that yet?
Passengers.
That sounds familiar.
Just came out, I think, with Chris Pratt.
Oh, that's older though. That's where they
No, this just came out.
not in. It came out like a year or two ago. It's just now on.
No, Passengers?
Yeah, with Chris Pratt and
I thought it said 2024.
2016.
2016.
What?
Yeah. You've been lied to, boy.
I swear I saw, maybe.
Chris Pratt lied to you.
Anyways, what?
You're blown away by like,
It feels very modern. Anyways, I've watched the first 25 minutes and I was like, this movie is fantastic.
I haven't not seen it, so
It's really good. Really well done.
it looked kind of sad and romantic. So I was like, no thanks.
It's funny and visually like pretty stunning.
I did watch the opening scene the other night, and that definitely looked good. So
It's definitely good. I would check it out. Anyways, back to the show. Sorry.
ending tangent.
that's all right. That's okay.
2016, I'm an idiot.
Well,
Well, it was in space. It's not like you'd see like a iPhone someone was using and be like, hey, that's a 2016 iPhone.
Like an old Toyota. Old Toyota
I
parked
did
in the...
feel like Chris Pratt was getting younger as he was getting older. I'm like, man, he looks like he's getting younger.
Jennifer Lawrence looks good.
Speaking of passengers, let's take a ride back to the mansion. It sounds like a wonderful place. I think we ended that there. And this would be a place where they would start the hunt for their psychics. I will not say X-Men again, but their psychics, their group of extraordinary psychics.
So this is important, but is everyone, say you can, if you're just psychokinetic, you can move things with your mind. Are you a psychic? You're not a medium in any way, but you just have like ability to move things with like, 11.
Oh, no, I don't think so.
Because you keep just saying psychics, and I feel like they're kind of more varied, aren't they?
Well, specifically, the people that come up in this book are all psychic.
Okay.
The four main extraordinary psychics that he brings to the mansion, which we're going to get into in the rest of this episode here, they are all psychic to maybe different sorts of psychic power.
Psychometry versus...
But they are all
divining.
Clairvoyant.
Yeah.
Yes. So they got this cool house, right? They got this cool mansion. They need now to create a space for these experiments to occur. And this is pretty fascinating. One of the investors is a man by the name of Jack Hammond. Jack Hammond Jr., actually. Wealthy, of course wealthy because he's an investor, wealthy American inventor, ESP advocate. So obviously very passionate about this. He jives with Puharich right away. They become super close friends. He holds more U.S. patents at this point in time than any other living American. So definitely like a guy you want on your side in this strange adventure. And his mentors are Tesla. Worked directly with Tesla, Thomas Edison, and Alexander Graham Bell. So if anybody has the answers to the universe, it's going to be, hopefully this man.
And he invented...
Well, one of the things he was known for inventing was a self-guided missile.
What? Really?
Or a torpedo. I'll have to look this up because I don't remember exactly.
That's okay. I was just curious if you knew anything offhand.
I did, and I didn't keep it.
Cool.
But a lot of cool things, okay? But I love this description of him because he sounds like just some awesome guy you would come across in like an old In Search of documentary when they interview somebody who's this eccentric, brilliant madman. And this is the description that Anne Jacobsen gives in her book, Phenomenon. Jack Hammond was rich, well-respected, and confident in his mystical and supernatural convictions. He lived in a medieval-style seaside castle in Gloucester, Massachusetts, filled with ancient artifacts collected from around the world. He practiced astrology and mental telepathy and believed in ghosts. And he seamlessly balanced success as a scientific inventor with numerous unorthodox ideas. Over discussions at the Warrenton estate, the bond between the men grew. Quote,
Jack became my mentor, teaching me more subtleties of life than any book could capture.
Puharich wrote in his journal.
He taught me the art of invention, how all his ideas came to him in his dreams, in reveries.
I just like that idea of this strange man in this old castle, but brilliant, obviously, and very successful. But anyway, so in an effort to expand on Tesla's ideas, his mentor's ideas, they would stay up and talk about these ideas. And Hammond and Puharich built a floor-to-ceiling box, a Faraday cage, made entirely of metal and lined with copper mesh. And the cage shielded anyone seated inside from all electrostatic and electromagnetic waves, except ELF waves. Puharich and Hammond then hired world-famous psychics and tested them inside the cage at Warrenton. They called their psychic experiment Project One. And the first psychic they bring to the mansion to test is a woman by the name of Eileen Garrett. And she is a pretty famous Irish medium at this point in her life. But she's famous in New York City, at least within the parapsychology set of people studying psychics. And so she comes to the Roundtable Foundation. And for a good period of time, several weeks in fact, Puharich and other researchers test her abilities within the Faraday cage using traditional things like you see in Ghostbusters, those what are they called? The Zener cards that have like a star and like a squiggly lines, 3 squiggly lines, maybe a square pyramid or something. Remember that scene though in Ghostbusters, Bill Murray, where he's got the guy hooked up to electrodes and he's like, is it a star?
Oh yeah.
No. Yes. Zzz. Great scene. Zapping the guys. Anyways, so they have those cards. They're testing them with those. So those go way back. But anyway, so they're testing Eileen in the mansion. And Puharich wrote this in his journal. Quote,
Mrs. Garrett's extrasensory perception was increased by a healthy margin over those scores obtained under ordinary conditions, suggesting electronic shielding had a positive impact on psychic functioning. These results encouraged the scientists to expand their tests at the Foundation and to include a wide array of psychic phenomena, such as mental telepathy, astrological predictions, and palm reading.
So that's our first medium of the night to come to the mansion. And we'll come back to more inductees, but there is a really fascinating account in the book right after this section. And it was about this time that Puharich had developed a theory he wanted to test. And this is a theory I think John would be interested in because of the involvement of radio waves, audio waves, and at the time, a perceived madness of a specific group of people. And the result ended up saving a man from a life of misery. So this is called Distant Voices, and this comes from her book.
Meanwhile, Puharich continued his laboratory experiments with audio waves. He was fascinated by audio aberrations in sane individuals, people who claimed to, quote, hear things inside their minds, but who did not otherwise test for psychosis. In search of one of these individuals to use as a test subject, Puharich reached out to his friend and colleague, Warren S. McCulloch, who worked with doctors and patients at Bellevue Psychiatric Hospital in New York City. Puharich asked McCulloch to find him a patient at Bellevue who'd been committed for the first time to the psychiatric ward for hearing voices. McCulloch located a machinist whose psychiatric medical profile was completely normal other than a sudden audio aberration. Before the voices appeared, the machinist had displayed no symptoms of insanity, whereas many a 1950s doctor would have written the man off as crazy. Puharich and his foundation had another theory to pursue. They believed the man might be hearing voices that were traveling on a radio wave, that the machinist was somehow tuned in to a specific radio frequency that other individuals could not hear. Quote, "We found out that his job was the key to the diagnosis," Puharich wrote. In the machine shop where the man worked, the machinist's daily routine was grinding metal casings against carborundum wheels for hours at a time. At the Foundation facility, Puharich's research team gave the man a dental examination, which showed that his metal fillings were coated with carborundum dust, or silicon carbide, a semiconductor. The carborundum behaved like the crystal rectifier in the old crystal radio sets of the 1920s, wrote Puharich. When the subject was placed inside the Faraday cage, all electrical and radio signals were eliminated. We found that his voices ceased, Puharich confirmed. His teeth were cleaned and he was cured of the psychiatric problem. The man was never crazy to begin with. Rather, we found that he was precisely tuned to radio station WOR in New York City. It was another medical breakthrough for the Roundtable Foundation. It's not surprising.
Crazy. I mean, what a lucky guy, I feel like.
What, that they figured out what it was?
Yeah, that he just, first of all, happened to be picked for this random study by this insane, brilliant man on a hillside.
I wonder how many other people end up like that.
You know, just
They
like
think they're crazy.
something fixable.
Well, yeah, that's like, I feel like Andrew Puharich, if he'd known about it, should have studied the hum.
Oh.
So many places where there's this hum that only certain people can hear,
Oh, yeah.
and it drives them nuts.
That would have been right up his alley.
They end up moving or just going crazy or just having to deal with it, suffering from it.
Maybe he and Hammond could have solved that had they.
What percentage of people think they're crazy and really are just listening to WOR?
or their local station.
Mm-hmm.
WNI.
Can you imagine hearing that
Hilarious.
randomly in
Oh
your
my
head?
gosh.
WNI.
Bob Golick.
For anyone that wants to know, we had a very fun jingle in our local radio station that everyone knows in the area.
Oh man, so dated.
I dropped it previously on the show.
Yeah, so dated, dude. Like made in the 70s or something.
The spirit of Akron on WNIR. Come on and listen at home, at work, in your car.
It's just so like, what's that show? Big Chuck and Little John. That time period of like Cleveland was
Yeah,
like popping and just
right.
like dirty snow and the winters.
Dirty snow.
It just makes you think of like
Dirty snow.
pizza and
Drew Carey.
Yeah.
Cleveland rocks. Cleveland rocks.
What a weird song.
Ohio.
Ohio.
Hello, Wisconsin. Sorry, guys.
Anyway, back to Maine.
Back to Maine.
Oh, I was wrong. I'm sorry, by the way, about that. It is right on the bay. It has got a crazy view.
Oh, good.
I was looking at another country. I'm sorry.
Well, we'll have that in the notes and in the video. Anyway, so as you might expect, these successful experiments are drawing a lot of attention. And one of the outfits that are paying attention is the U.S. military, as you might expect. Things start to shift here a little bit. It begins with a top brass Navy guy coming and basically wanting to see Puharich, having a meeting with him and talking about the potential of using extrasensory perception to guide torpedoes or missiles, one of those two. And he's like, I would love for you to prepare a briefing for us back at Langley. Well, I guess that's CIA. Back at somewhere where the Navy people go.
The ocean.
Somewhere in D.C. And as I mentioned in the beginning of the episode, he's torn because he's an anti-establishment sort of figure, but he is also patriotic. This is right after World War II, pre-Kennedy assassination. Majority of people still really believed in their country and didn't believe that the government was corrupt. So he had no reason really to question these sorts of things. So he does. He does this. He prepares a briefing. He brings it to the Navy. And sadly, they love it. That's not the sad part. The sad part is, a few weeks later, after returning to Maine, Puharich receives a letter from the Army calling him back into military service. This was a major turning point in the life of Dr. Andrija Puharich. Many of his pursuits at the Roundtable Foundation were esoteric and nonconformist, existing far outside the bounds of scientific oversight and stringent laboratory controls. Beware the establishment, his old friend Rudolf had warned. And yet here, now, Puharich was being called back into government service, and there was nothing he or any of his wealthy benefactors could do.
That's a bummer.
Yeah.
Doesn't he end up having to focus on chemical weapons and bioweapons effect?
It gets a real kind of like...
He's not doing telepathy in the Army.
No, I'm sure it's a stimulating job for someone with a medical background, but for him who's interested in paranormal phenomena, he's bored to death and depressed. He misses his colleagues.
You know what I do when I'm depressed?
What's that, Jer?
I snuggle up in my comfy, cozy, miracle-made sheets.
Oh yeah, I can see why. They're like a hug.
They are like a big blue hug. Well, mine are blue.
This episode brought to you by Miracle Made Sheets.
Guys, if you haven't tried these sheets, you gotta try them.
Cool.
Bacteria can find you anywhere.
That's true.
From creepy, clandestine mansions on the cliff to secret CIA bunkers with a cold cot where you're left to fend for yourself against the elements. These sheets will keep you cool at night and also safe from germs with their silver-infused fabrics.
Yes, that's right. Silver infused like a magical mithril nightgown. Sure, yes, as many people don't know, normal sheets can harbor gross bacteria. But these sheets, these Miracle Made sheets, we do really love these sheets. We've each got a set. They're self-cooling.
Self-cleaning.
Self-cleaning too, yes. It just gives you a better sleep overall. They're also so comfortable. They're like a hug. I always say that because it's true. You gotta try it.
And Miracle is so confident in their Miracle Made sheets that they back it with a 30-day money-back guarantee.
That's right.
So if you aren't 100% satisfied, send them back. They'll totally refund you.
No harm, no clandestine foul.
So upgrade your sleep with Miracle Made. Go to trymiracle.com/beliefhole and use the code BELIEFHOLE to claim your free 3-piece towel set. Ooh, towels.
Yes!
And save over 40%. Again, that's trymiracle.com/beliefhole to treat yourself. And as always, thanks Miracle Made for sponsoring this episode.
Seriously, guys, check them out. They are great sheets. Tell them Belieful sent you.
Link in the show notes. Chris, I bet the military didn't have Miracle Made sheets, which is probably one of the things that Puharich wasn't looking forward to.
I think you might be onto something, Jer. But yes, back to our story. Puharich is about to go work for the Army. He's not looking forward to it.
But before he goes, he gets a fortuitous phone call. And he goes to visit that first extraordinary psychic person he brought in, the Irish medium, Eileen, at a dinner party, and is introduced to a man who would come to begin the sort of corruption of his scientific mind, I guess you could say. This guy was sort of a guru, an Indian mystic, very controversial, and his name was Dr. Vinod. And Puharich becomes sort of enthralled with this guy after this experience, this one fateful night before he rejoins the military. And this would be seen kind of as a turning point in Puharich's credibility over the years from the perspective of scientists and skeptics. People that down the road would call him out for his quote-unquote pseudoscience. They would look to this point and poke at it and say, okay, well, here's a turning point for sure. Because this is the night that Puharich met Dr. Vinod. And this encounter, according to them, colored Puharich's once healthy skepticism on extrasensory investigation. As Puharich prepared to depart the Roundtable Foundation on Army sabbatical, he traveled to New York City to attend a party for the Irish psychic Eileen Garrett. There he met a Hindu scholar and mystic named Dr. D.G. Vinod, who was visiting America as part of a lecture series for the Rotary Club. Quote,
At that time, Vinod surprised me by asking permission to hold my right finger at the middle joint with his right thumb and index finger.
wrote Puharich.
He said that he used this form of contact with a person to read his past and his future.
Intrigued, Puharich listened. Dr. Vinod held Puharich's finger this way for about a minute. Quote,
Whistling between his teeth as though he were trying to find a pitch. He leaned back in his chair and for an hour told my life story with utter precision, as though he were reading out of a book. His accuracy about the past was extraordinary. That is pretty crazy.
yeah,
Fingers know all.
fingers do know all.
Well, interesting too is the honing of the tuning, almost like he was aligning his pitch with the resonance of the universe, creation.
Yeah, it's like a tuning fork.
To access the Akashic records, perhaps. I mean, that's got to be it.
It's got to be. It's the only scientific explanation.
So anyway, Puharich was transfixed. He was smitten by one of the oldest forms of divination. This is called chiromancy, whereas knowledge of the future is precognition, knowledge of the past that could not have been learned by normal means is called retrocognition. So Puharich vows to bring Vinod to the Roundtable Foundation before he returned to the U.S. Army. On December 31st, 1952, he does just that. And I'll continue to read here. Puharich brought Dr. Vinod to the Roundtable Foundation. When they arrived at the Warrenton estate, Dr. Vinod entered the great hall of the laboratory without saying a word or even taking off his winter coat. Quote,
Hank and I followed him.
Puharich later wrote, and when he sat down, quote,
We realized he had gone into a trance.
at exactly 9 p.m., a deep, sonorous voice came out of Vinod's mouth, totally unlike his own high-pitched, soft voice with its distinct Indian accent. Puharich decided that Dr. Vinod had channeled a supernatural force. When pressed for a name, Vinod identified the force as a group of entities called the 9 Principles and Forces. Puharich summoned his wealthy benefactors and asked Dr. Vinod to again lead the group in seance.
It's always a group job, I feel like.
A group job.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's a foundation. You got to get people together and, approve these psychics.
On the other side?
On the other side.
Yeah, I mean, like with channelers, I feel like a lot of times it's some sort of, group coming through.
Well, if you only get like a few people being able to channel, you might have a lot of people waiting in line. Maybe they just do like a group coupon.
That's a good point.
Take like 5 at a time. I mean, the whole like the 9 principles and forces, that's a whole story unto itself. But for our purposes here, we're just introducing these psychics. But again, this is a psychic that is pretty controversial.
Vinod.
Yeah, but he does bring back Vinod to the foundation.
So is he arguably the one that's a little more, people see a little more woo-woo, quote unquote?
Yeah.
Kind of the turd in the punch bowl of the psychic party at the mansion?
That's how he's seen later on. And they say that this is sort of the beginning signs of Puharich's overwillingness to believe, and maybe overlooking of some of the scientific rigor he may have had. But I want to move on because I want to get to our next psychic. And there's a period of time that I'm not going to go super deep into right now, but will in the expansion in regards to his time in the military and some sneaky things that transpire there, and very significant things, where Puharich becomes disillusioned with the military. And we'll get into more of that and sort of the sneaky things that occur during that period in the expansion, but without going into the conspiring that occurs while he's in the service of the Army. I'll just sum it up by saying he's missing his companions back at the Roundtable Foundation. Family life's not going well at home. His wife's in kind of dire straits at this point. And he just wants to get back to what he loves best, and get out of the military. And he gets a chance at this when he gets a phone call from an old friend at the foundation, one Alice Bouverie, who you'll remember. And this phone call might just be the way out of the military for him. And this is the introduction of Harry Stump. He is our third extraordinary psychic. And he's a sculptor from Holland. His story is really interesting, and it might sound familiar. John, you're a film buff, right? You watch movies. You might recognize some aspects of his origin story. So let me know if you do.
I'm not a film buff.
I know, I was kind of joking, but you do like movies.
I do.
And I think you've seen this one that I'm
I've
going to reference.
started to get more into them.
Good, as you should.
But it's so hard to find good ones.
This is true.
It is.
You got to go into the classics.
That's why I get excited when I run across a good movie.
Well, absolutely. But yeah, let me know if this sounds familiar. Jeremy, I'm sure you'll probably get it if I didn't already mention this to you. But this, when I read this in the book, it really did remind me of a certain character, a pretty well-known character, maybe not today as much, but this Harry Stump character, which Jeremy pointed out is a kind of a funny name.
Harry Stump.
Harry Stump. I didn't really put that together when I read it. Anyway, so Harry Stump, he was a sculptor from Holland, but this little excerpt will explain what happened to him. And maybe it'll give you a clue on what I'm thinking of in regards to the movie. So this is where Puharich gets the fortuitous call about the medium Harry Stump from Alice Bouverie.
He and his girlfriend were here for dinner last night.
Bouverie told Puharich.
Being a sculptor, I thought he'd be interested in some of my pieces.
Bouverie was referring to the collection of museum-quality jewelry she'd inherited from her late father. When he handed her a 3,400-year-old scarab-shaped necklace engraved with Egyptian hieroglyphics, Stump had, quote,
staggered around the room for a bit and fell into a chair.
Worried that the sculptor was having an epileptic fit, Bouverie told Puharich she had rushed to the kitchen to get Stump a glass of water while the other dinner party guests tended to him, quote,
When I got back, he was sitting rigidly upright in the chair and staring wildly in the distance. He asked for a paper and a pencil and began to draw Egyptian hieroglyphs.
In a guttural voice, Stump alternated between English and an unrecognizable foreign language, as if channeling an entity from ancient Egypt. And in this trance state, he spoke of, quote,
a drug that would stimulate one's psychic faculties.
Puharich asked to see the drawings. Bouverie concurred. And even better, she revealed that one of her guests had transcribed what Stump said during the spontaneous seance. Bouverie agreed to send Puharich the documents right away. So interesting, we're getting into some Egyptian channeled spirits. This actually will get really interesting in the expansion. His story is somewhat tragic. He doesn't die in this story, but what happens to him is
Harry Stump
is unfortunate, and what happens to the Roundtable Foundation will be interesting to hear in the expansion as well. We have a fourth medium that's going to come into play in the expansion. Peter Herkos, who we'll hear about later. He's the guy, darn it, he's the guy I wanted to mention who reminds me of a certain character in a film. So check out the expansion to hear what I'm talking about. That was not intentional. He's fascinating, so we'll bring him in. So, but at this time, we were leaving this today in the main episode. The Foundation is doing well. There are some family issues, kind of intense family issues, obviously going on with Puharich. We'll get into some of those other issues, but investment and interest are on the upswing at the Roundtable. Puharich is about to return to the Roundtable to do his experiments, but there are storm clouds brewing. There are strange things afoot in the mansion. Ghosts, madness, betrayal, and disillusion are lurking. But you know what they say? When an East Coast paranormal mansion closes a window, Big Brother opens a door.
Oh, Lord.
And that's what we're going to get into in the expansion. We're going to get into that, as you were wondering about, Jeremy, the mushroom that was just mentioned by that last psychic we talked about.
God's flesh.
The secret mushroom and how that relates to Puharich's attractiveness toward the CIA. They want him on a specific mushroom hunt for these clairvoyant purposes that we touched on in the beginning. And of course, we'll be getting into the more extreme experiments going on in the mansion, the dosing of unsuspecting psychics and the results.
Oh.
And of course, Puharich's developing relationship with the CIA. He's got some pretty crazy adventures coming, as well as his discovery of Uri Geller and the pretty incredible experiments that were done by the CIA and by SRI, the Stanford Research Institute, that a lot of people don't know about.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
And why a lot of people completely discount Uri Geller. Because at the time, the world didn't know about these classified experiments, let alone their results. And I think most still don't. So definitely join us in the expansion to hear the resolution of this tale and some more intriguing thoughts.
And for those of you who don't know, the expansion is not just an expanded version of the main episode. It is a whole episode unto itself, fully produced, fully sound designed, researched, fully immersive. So check it out if you're interested. An expansion episode is released every time we drop a main one. So if you sign up as a member, you'll get an expansion episode, basically a bonus episode drop the same time you get a main episode drop.
Yes!
So to sign up, go to beliefful.com and click on the big red Join the Expansion button. And we'll see you on the other side.
If you ever run out of the hole, we have over 100 extra episodes. So there's plenty more to explore.
That's right.
If you run out of the main episodes.
Right on.
So join us there. Get sloppy.
Fall in
Slime it up.
the hole.
Oh, and quick merch update, guys. I know I promised last episode that the new merch line would drop by this episode, but we've run into some issues and we are very nearly at the end, I'm sure. So hang in there. It's absolutely positively have to be coming out by next episode.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to give you guys a quick update on that. And hopefully we smash all those gremlins this week and get this thing finally launched. So we'll keep you guys posted.
All right.
Yeah, that was a great episode, Chris. Good job on that research.
Yeah, good research.
Did you guys enjoy it?
Yeah.
I did. I like
Good.
the X-Men.
I do it for you. Now you know what they're all about.
I like the X-Men part.
More than the X-Men, it reminded me of Nikola Tesla's, when he'd have people coming over just hang out in his
Yes.
like electric lab
Like Mark Twain.
where people would walk by and there'd be sparks shooting off their shoes.
Yeah.
And like Mark Twain would be hanging out and other big names at the time, kind of in pop culture, but in philosophy and study. Just like here, you had these kind of people popping in and out.
Yeah.
I read somewhere that it was one dude, Aldous Huxley. He'd hang out there too, apparently.
Oh, really? I
Yeah.
did not know that.
I think in the kind of Mark Twain way, or Samuel Clemens, just kind of interested in what's going on.
Yeah.
But yeah, I like that kind of feeling of people just hanging around.
Yeah. Well, you guys check out this book. Again, it's Phenomenon by Anne Jacobsen, and it is incredible. There's so many other good things we'll get into later in the season, I'm sure, because it's got so many interesting stories in there. But yeah, join us back at the mansion. Find out what happens in the expansion. And until then, we love you, and we'll see you next time
On
Belief Hole. Goodbye.